Hello everyone, thank you for joining Ranger Fall's webcast, DevOps and All the Continuouses. Here to facilitate the discussion this afternoon is Helen Beal. As mentioned earlier, please write any questions you may have in the chat box or use the question function in your GoToWebinar control panel, and they'll be answered at the end. I'll now pass it over to Helen.
Thanks, Priyanka, and hello everybody. Good afternoon and good morning. Yes, so today we're going to talk about DevOps and all the continuouses. That is a made-up word. Those who know me well will know that I have a bit of predilection for making up words, but we certainly see a pattern in the DevOps world, and perhaps in the world at large, for putting continuous as a word in front of other words. And I just wanted to spend some time today exploring that. So there is quite a lot of background to this particular webcast. I wrote a blog, you can see, back in March of this year. In fact, I'm going to follow the same series of continuouses as I did in the blog post, and if you download the slides following this webcast, you'll find the link to the blog in the notes on this slide. And you'll see, if you've just kind of read the start there, that we actually ran a survey around that time as well. I think it finished around June time, asking people how continuous their DevOps is. And we asked lots of questions, and we're going to go through some of the material today and some of the answers that people gave us. So I'm going to start with one of the most controversial ones, which is continuous funding. We talk about this a lot when we do maturity assessments with people, because one of the challenges we see in DevOps is that people have started to develop in an agile manner versus a waterfall manner, but they're still budgeting in an annual waterfall type basis. So we get into situations where people are trying to deliver incremental change, and that change is being redefined and pivoted on all the time, and yet they're trying to draw down budgets that have been defined up to, in some cases, 18 months previously. So in the survey, we asked this question, whether people plan their budget and use their budget in annual cycles, or whether people are able to allocate funds against new products or features as required. So we call this sometimes sprint-based financing. And you can see that the majority of people, by a percent, were in the annual cycle space, where just 1% less actually have a bit of both. Lots of people don't know, and only a few, so only 6%, are doing this sprint-based financing or this continuous funding that we are looking at in more detail. So I recently presented at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in London alongside one of our customers, Lego, but we also saw this chap, Jonathan Smart, speak. So Jonathan Smart is from the Barclays Bank in the UK, and he was talking about how he has transformed his part of the Barclays business. And he was saying that in the last 12 months, he's managed to move from 4% of his strategic change projects to 50% of his strategic change projects, from a waterfall approach to an agile approach. So I asked him on Twitter if he was also managing to support that change by financing or funding in an agile or continuous manner. And this was his response: we're starting to pilot agile investment with quarterly rolling wave instead of annual budgeting. So this was really interesting to me. It showed a very large enterprise bank in the UK actually understanding that this is the way that finance may need to change to support the way that we're working when we are delivering agile projects. This article is also linked in the notes. I found it really interesting. It's by Mustafa Kabadir, who is from IBM, and it gives some other ideas about how you can transform your DevOps budgeting process into a more fluid and iterative approach. So this is a very well-known continuous that we use a lot in DevOps. We talk a lot about in DevOps, so CI, continuous integration. And what we asked here, so CI really is the practice of developers merging their code into branches. So here we said, so how often do you merge all developer working copies to a shared mainline? And you can see most people are doing CI, is what we're really doing here, and doing it regularly, so doing it either multiple times a day or daily. So CI is a relatively mature process now, and things like Jenkins obviously supporting that sort of thing, and Git and Bitbucket and things such like. So this is the slide. So those of you as well who know us well, you may have even been on one of our courses. So we are partners with the DevOps Institute. The DevOps Institute write the courseware. This is a courseware from the DevOps Foundation course. So we spend some time with the trainees on this particular course, and if you're interested in attending, the next published schedule is on the 6th and 7th of September in London. We talk about continuous integration. So this is how we describe it. So, as I said, this development practice that requires developers to integrate code into a shared repository on a daily basis. And you can see there's an automated build and there's some automated testing going on here as well. So we asked, does your continuous integration server automatically run integration tests when it detects a new commit? And again, quite a decent level of maturity in the answers that we had here. So over half of people do that. A lot of people want to do it and aren't quite there yet. We did have one percentage there that want a CI server, didn't have one, and a surprising amount actually. I thought 7% don't have a CI server still, but generally a reasonable level of maturity out there. So probably the next biggest used continuous term in DevOps would be continuous delivery, so often known as short for CD, and you'll understand why I made that distinction in a moment. So again, material from our DevOps Foundation course talking about continuous delivery. So continuous delivery basically ensures that your software is always in a releasable state throughout its life cycle. It doesn't mean you're deploying all the time, and we'll come on to continuous deployment in just a moment. So it's an extension of CI, or continuous integration, and it gives you this fast automated feedback on the production readiness of systems. And it prioritizes having that software available to release or available to deploy over having lots of new features. So it supports very much this incremental approach that we're trying to get to when we're doing Agile, and the velocity that we're trying to achieve when we're doing DevOps. So you can see the last couple of comments there are really talking about it's the basis for or the foundation for the next continuous we're going to look after this one. So you can see in this diagram that the DevOps, the continuous delivery basically kind of stops here where we've got the red arrow after staging and production. So we've automated all the way up to that point. So we've got a bit of merged and tested code that's ready to go out. So one of the exercises that we do in the DevOps Foundation course is we ask the students if they can take these terms of CI and CD and apply the 3 ways to them. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the 3 ways, they are the principles that underpin DevOps. If you read the Phoenix project, you'll become very familiar with them. And the first way, which is the top one here, is about increasing the flow. The second one, which is the middle one, is about amplifying the feedback loops. And the third way is about continuous experimentation and learning. So you can see quite easily how continuous deployment helps us increase the flow. Obviously, we've automated things, so we've taken out bottlenecks, we've removed constraints, and we've made things move faster. So you might be wondering how continuous delivery might help you with a feedback loop. Well, the idea is that if you're pushing more features through faster, you can get increased and earlier response to change that you're delivering to your customers, and how they're receiving and enjoying or not enjoying innovation that you may be providing to them. And lastly, the experimentation and learning thing, again, lots of little loops, so we have a constant chance to try out new things and learn from our mistakes or learn from our successes. So as I said, the first way, very much about improving flow, very much supported by continuous delivery. So another one we talk about a lot is continuous testing, and I find it difficult sometimes to kind of unpick continuous delivery and continuous testing, because testing is built into continuous delivery. But we explore this in our survey that we ran earlier on in the year. So we asked people, do all of your environments match production? A pretty hefty people said no. Some people said sometimes, but only a small proportion, less than 20%, do have production-like test environments. This is a really important point when we're trying to build the safety factor into what we're doing when we're doing DevOps. So lots of people think of DevOps as just being about velocity. We very much talk about making better software faster and more safely. So the better part, we often use lean principles to improve the processes and the way that we're doing things. The faster part is very much the Agile approach, and we don't just do Agile for development. At Range 4, we also have another course that we deliver from the DevOps Institute. In fact, another 2 courses. One is the Agile Service Manager, and one is Agile Process Owner. Both of those courses are set up to help operations, people or IT infrastructure staff deliver services in an Agile manner, and thereby match or kind of mirror the the velocity that we're seeing coming out of development. So having these test environments similar or the same all the way route to live allows us to minimize the impact of defects that might only occur in certain environments. So you've probably seen the meme. There's a meme with a little girl with sort of running away from a burning building. She's like, worked fine in dev, your problem now. You know, it's imperative that we have these environments the same so that we can run our tests and know that they're going to work throughout our route to live and all the way into production. So I talked about continuous delivery earlier, and I talked about it being CD, and it's kind of, we've then got this next level. So if you think of like the 3 levels of DevOps automation almost at this point in time that people have talked about a lot, about being continuous integration, then continuous delivery, and then the pinnacle, if you like, of this automation being continuous deployment, we've got another CD. So I sometimes wonder if we should call this CDep to try and differentiate from CD. So again, from our DFC, materials does have a definition of continuous deployment. So it removes the manual steps. So if you remember, and we'll see that chart again in a minute, where the continuous delivery stopped. So the manual step would be to push a button on deployment, whereas here what we say is, right, if it passed all the tests, it's actually going to be automatically deployed into production. And I think it's fair to say that this isn't for everybody. Not everybody wants to be able to do this. It may be not practical for you, or you may be restricted by certain regulatory requirements in your particular industry. But this is certainly where lots of people want to go, and when people start talking about DevOps unicorns, and whether you like or loathe the term, and I lean towards the loathe a little bit, you might, people like Amazon and Etsy, this is how they've managed to do the volumes of changes that they do. And what they've done is they've built in all of this testing, so they're not constantly breaking things when they're deploying stuff, because they've built a lot of safety in. So you can see this was the earlier chart that we looked at when we had continuous delivery, and you can see here that we've turned that arrow green, so we are pushing that through automatically. I'm just going to put back to that slide actually, just to make a note, because we're going to come back to this in just a second, but there's a note down here about release, and there's a lot of confusion, I think, about the difference between a release process and a deployment process, and we're going to have a look at that in a bit more detail in just a minute. So here we have some more results from our survey. So we asked a number of questions around deployment automation. So we've got 28% of the respondents that were deploying a new release into production monthly, only 20% weekly, and only 15% deploying a new release into production a few times a week. I've been working in the release automation space for quite a while now. We used to ask people questions like, okay, so you're releasing once every 2 months now, how would it feel if you could do that once a week? But actually what people really want is this ability to deploy on demand, so to be ready when the business is ready and the code is ready to make that deployment. And 19% already do, so some people, this is a growing maturity area and people are getting there. This is an important question that came from my colleague Daniel in the survey, which was who can link instance back to a defect that should have been found during the analysis, development, test or acceptance phase. And a fairly healthy 51% can actually do that. So they do have that level of traceability that enables them to find that defect. What isn't so great is that defect obviously should have been found during one of these other phases, and it may have been things like when we talked about continuous testing a moment ago and having these production-like test environments all the way through route to live. It may have been a problem with that sort of thing that caused that thing to creep through. We have another thing in DevOps that we talk about, which is never let a known defect pass downstream. It sounds really obvious and common sense, but I have actually been on customer site. I was delivering some training in Switzerland last sort of December time, and we had a break which happened to coincide with a break in their systems or a systems outage, and I was invited to join the war room with the particular customer to hear what was going on. And what was really striking was that they actually knew that that defect was in there, that everybody knew it was there, and they decided to go live with it, and they actually brought down a couple of countries' internal systems as a result. And the good thing was they knew what it was immediately, so they were able to repudiate the error quite fast. However, it would have been obviously better not to have happened in the first place. So This came out last week. This is the Gartner Magic Quadrant for ARA, or Application Release Automation. So this was very interesting to me because we've been in this area of release automation or deployment automation. We've been asking for this for several years. So in the notes of this particular slide, you'll also find a link to a blog that I wrote about this last week. So you remember I was looking at the word release a couple of slides ago when we were talking about continuous deployment. And Gartner really coined this term application release automation, which became very popular in the marketplace. In fact, to the extent that companies like BMC actually named their products ARA using this terminology. It can be a little bit misleading, I feel, because we're really talking about release and deployment automation. And in fact, you'll see there's a little note underneath the screenshot of the paper saying continuous release deployment, which is a term, again, that Gartner used in this particular paper. I think it is quite confusing for customers. I think we understand a release is a new feature set of a software application that we're about to release. The deployment is the manual or automated activity to actually push that through into production. But there is some concern over it. Some organisations like IBM, who you'll see up in the top right here, they made an acquisition about 3 or 4 years ago now of a company called Urban Code, very famous around Hill Pro, and also have their own deployment solutions. And in fact, when IBM bought Urban Code, they had 3 products in the brand: Urban Code Build, Urban Code Release, and Urban Code Deploy. So they very much made those distinctions between those processes. And in fact, I was doing some work with UBS around that sort of time, and we had a lot of discussion about how to differentiate or draw the line between where the release process stops and the deployment process starts. And they made it quite simple, actually. They brought out a spreadsheet that was effectively a run book of a WAS, or a web application server deployment. And we looked at it, and we were able to color code the steps that were parts of the release process. And there were lots of kind of things like request a security check, request port open, request this, that, and the deployment bit was really about building the package and deploying that package onto the server. So continuous measurement. So those of you familiar with DevOps will be familiar with the CALMS acronym that we use as a kind of elevator pitch to describe in as few words as possible about what DevOps is about. So C is not continuous, actually, it's culture. A, automation. L was a letter that Jez Humble put in the CAMS, the original CAMS acronym from John Willis. Jez Humble from ThoughtWorks then added the L for lean. And M is for measurement or metrics. So a very key part of what we do in DevOps is measure stuff. So measure where we're at, measure where we're going to, and pivot and make decisions off the back of that. And the S, if you're wondering, is for sharing. So we asked this question, and we're going to talk quite a lot about this concept. So we call it ideation to realization. So the ability of being able to measure this whole cycle, this whole release cycle, from start to finish. So from the concept of an idea or a feature appearing all the way through the development and the delivery, and then being able to measure real time what that is worth to the business in real value terms once it's gone live into production. So we asked people whether they thought that this was something that they would want to do, or whether they think it was excessive in their own eyes, or their customers' eyes, or their internal stakeholders' eyes. So quite a few, 29% thought that this was excessive in their own eyes, and actually 3% said in my eyes specifically. 31 said not, and 24 said not in the eyes of our external stakeholders, and 34 said not in the eyes of 34 said yes in the eyes of internal stakeholders. So, you know, it's kind of a bit 50-50 on when people think this is something that they want to do. Interestingly, no one really responded about the eyes of their customer. So nobody, it sounds like nobody has really polled with their customers whether that's something that they want to do. Generally, we see a trend as people mature of being able to wanting to get closer and closer to this. We spend a lot of time when we're doing DevOps transformations working on the metrics that matter with organisations. It's a really difficult thing for people to do. Either people don't have any metrics, or they have lots and lots and lots and don't know which ones matter. which ones are most important, and they're often measuring things that don't measure business value. And an increasingly key thing that IT organisations need to do is report their business value back to their stakeholders and their investors. So on the subject of metrics that matter, right first time is a big favourite of Daniel, who heads up our consultancy practice. Do you use right first time as a metric to manage quality across the ideation to realisation lifecycle? So you see a lot said no, and this is one of the first metrics we really recommend that people use. A good 20+% said yes, so that's good, and lots didn't know. Interestingly as well, cost of delay is another really key metric that we really recommend people look at when they're doing DevOps. And 70% don't use that as a metric or a way to prioritise work. But 30%, nearly 30% do, so that's on the other side quite good. So Dynatrace, we are a Dynatrace partner, and I've just got a few screenshots from Dynatrace. So this one really is about continuous delivery analytics for metrics. So this is kind of interesting. So taking this idea of monitoring and being able to report business value to another level is actually being able to analyze your continuous delivery performance and then give yourself the facts that enable you to choose what to innovate. So this is kind of just recapping on what we just said in the last few slides, really. So this is about being able to amplify your feedback loops and understand how to prioritize your work based on what you're receiving data-wise through your analytics that's linked, in this particular case, to your continuous delivery engine. So, continuous monitoring leading us into that quite nicely from Dynatrace. So, as I just kind of said, the monitoring part is a really key underpinning piece of giving us the measurement M, or metrics M, in the CALMS DevOps acronym, and the key bit it really helps us with is this middle one, so the amplification of feedback loops, which supports the experiments and our learning. So just to reiterate, that's very much around the second way, amplifying our feedback loops. So another partner of ours, so you remember earlier I was talking about another kind of elevator pitch that we use about what DevOps is about, and we often say DevOps is about making better software faster and more safely. We talk about shifting left a lot as well. So we are partners with Sonatype. Many of you have probably not heard of Sonatype, but you will have heard of Maven and Nexus. So Sonatype, we're responsible for the Maven and Nexus artifact repositories. What we're doing, or what they do with the Nexus Lifecycle product, is they enable you to build security in very early. So they're using the term here on this slide, this is originally a Sonatype slide, continuously monitor. So they're continuously monitoring applications and new risks. And the way that it does that is it integrates into your IDEs, your integrated development environments, so where your developers are working. And as your developers choose open source components and put them or take them from the repository, they can receive warnings if there are any problems with them in terms of vulnerabilities, or perhaps there might be some license implications. So lots of open source software that on the face of it looks open source and free, if you use it in particular ways, it actually incurs a commercial charge, and that can be quite a legal risk and quite painful for organisations that don't properly cover that off. So Dynatrace again, so I think of Dynatrace as application performance monitoring, application performance management, perhaps continuous monitoring, and then they've also come up with this term continuous performance management. So yet again, perhaps a case of putting continuous in front of an existing word or phrase that we use quite regularly. So again, here's a screenshot of that particular page. Where they talk about continuous performance management. So this ability to have something running all the time on your systems that are live and telling you real time what's going on. So continuous improvement. Now this is a kind of was one of the entry questions we asked in the kind of like a warm-up question we asked in the survey, what people are into. So you can see a pretty reasonable maturity now around Agile and Scrum. Some good stuff going on around Kanban, often used as a supporting tool for Agile and Scrum. Bit low on Lean, TDD and BDD. coming up there. CMMI quite low, safe quite low. We have quite a lot of experience with our customers about safe. There's quite, I'd say, it's quite a split view on whether safe is useful or not. Perhaps a topic for a discussion another day. Surprisingly low amount, I'd say, on ITSM as well. As I said, at Range 4, we're really taking a lot of people into the next evolution, if you like, of ITSM to agile service management. As I said earlier, we've got a couple of courses that we deliver from the DOI, the DevOps Institute, that help people agile their service management, help their operations staff learn how to match velocity coming out of development. So this one, if we're talking again about continuous improvement, increasingly popular is using gamification. So again, this is a pattern that's coming out of the unicorns, for want of a better term. So Netflix invented Chaos Monkey, that you're probably quite familiar with, which basically kind of randomly takes out servers. So it basically tests your ability to recover and remediate and find errors. Not many people that we surveyed using that sort of thing yet. Lots of people using hackathons, so that's pretty good. Hackathons sometimes mean different things to different people. So sometimes people use them to kind of brainstorm new ideas. Some people use them as kind of more like a hacking day or a hacking afternoon to try and break a site. You probably all got security departments that are paying people to do penetration testing or vulnerability testing on your sites, but you can also use your own people to try and do that sort of stuff, and people do. But lots, as you can see, 54% at the moment not doing gamification. We really recommend using gamification as ways to embed the third way, so the continuous experimentation and learning piece into the continuous improvement cycle. Probably worth a mention here, we've got 11% using simulations. We recently launched a simulation called the Phoenix Project game. So those of you familiar with DevOps will be familiar with the book from Gene Kim and George Bear about basically DevOps. It's a novel about DevOps, and we, along with our partner GamingWorks, have written it, and we helped co-write it, and we are now delivering it. It's a business-based, card-based simulation for around 12 people, and you will take on a character from the book, and you basically look at how your culture and behaviour supports DevOps principles. Karma points I find really interesting. I first came across these a few years ago when someone mentioned them in the context of Facebook developers. So the idea is that if you, as a developer, do a deployment and it breaks something, you lose karma points. So the more successful deployments or features that you make that contributes to deployments, the more karma points that you get, and the more chance you've got of getting your feature into deployment. Facebook also run a public bug bounty program. It looks like something that becomes more popular. So actually rewarding people for finding bugs or defects in your software. There's surprising nearly 50-50 split on whether people have a continuous improvement project or not. And actually, just before I came on this webcast, one of my colleagues asked me, wondering whether continuous is really a good thing. And when I was writing this particular presentation for today, I was thinking about how a few years ago I used to often use the phrase, the only constant is change. And I kind of feel like we're in a bit of a position now where everything is continuous, and this is kind of how we may conclude the presentation later. I wonder, and it's maybe something you can think about now, and maybe ask some questions now or at the end in the question panel, about whether you think being continuous is a good thing, and what you think the downsides of being continuous might be. So continuous innovation was actually one of the comments I received on my blog. So you remember when I started this whole presentation, I said I'd written a blog back in March when we were launching the survey itself. And quite a few people answered with additional continuouses that they had thought of. And one was continuous innovation. If we go talk about Dynatrace again, this is another page from their site that's screenshot here, where they're talking about continuous innovation. And again, with these fact-based feedback loops. So the ability for, when you do this type of real-time monitoring or continuous performance management, you amplify that feedback loop and you allow yourself to make better decisions. So you remember the third way, experimentation and learning. So here, a bit of continuous experimentation and learning was popped up on the comments. That is the third way. So a very important part of a DevOps. This is an interesting one, another one that popped up on the comments. So continuous job satisfaction. I'm still not quite clear what Rob meant, but you can see his quote here. So, you know, I think he's about creating these DevOps culture where people feel really they've got the sense of autonomy and mastery and purpose, and they're really enjoying what they do. They're making progress. They're not stressed at work, so you know, really helps that kind of thing move forward. Do feel free to comment on the blog if you want to. But because a lot of the DevOps work that we do is central or centered around cultural change, we do a lot of work trying to help people understand what their culture looks like now. So describing it, analysing it, quantifying it. So we have ways of quantifying the characteristics of a particular culture, and we have ways of describing what a future ideal DevOps utopic culture might look like. And the important thing is really being able to give people the tools to get through those two places, because to really embrace the principles of DevOps, it requires an entire organisation of humans. So tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of humans to switch on to these concepts and be ready to take them on. So I particularly like this quote because it really helps us understand that we do have some control over our destiny, and the positions we find ourselves in is because of our thinking. And if we want to change stuff, we have to change the way that we think, or the way that we operate. So one of the more recent cultural tools we've discovered is something called Holacracy, and Holacracy is around basically looking at the way that we run a business or run an organisation in a different way. So traditionally we've had these hierarchical command and conquer type trees that you can see here, and you can see we've got a smiling person at the top, and as you go down the chain you've got less and less happy people. So what we're really trying to do is get these people on all the levels happy, but the irony often is that these people are actually the people that are doing the work. These are our feedback loops. These are the people that are listening to the customer and integrating with the customer on a daily basis. So Holacracy basically tries to move us away from a hierarchical command and control type organizational structure and into something more like this. So something that looks more like a biological organism, that has cells, that has organs. These are circles, and we understand how the roles are distributed within the circles. And there's quite a lot of useful tools in Holacracy. One, this is Glassfrog, which is the particular tool where you can see that you actually you have your roles, and you manage your tensions, and you put all your governance meetings and all of your meeting notes and results in here. So lots of useful tools in Holacracy. I talked about agile development. I've talked about agile service management. For me, Holacracy is a way of agile organizational management. So this is a quote from one of the people that have attended one of the Holacracy classes about structuring your organization for evolution. So DevOps really is an evolutionary transformational journey. So Holacracy very much suits it. And in fact, the presentation that I did with Lego that I mentioned earlier on at the DevOps Enterprise Summit was very much about the correlation between Holacracy and DevOps, because they have a huge amount in common in terms of the outputs that they desire. This was another note on the, actually sorry, it wasn't a note on my blog, it was another thing that I stumbled across recently. There's a webcast coming up on August 25th, you can see here, again the link to that webcast will be in the presentation. So I thought, wow, another continuous teaming, so I'll be attending that and seeing what they say. It should be pretty interesting. So yeah, it's pretty much continuous everything, right? It seems to be a bit of a trend to put continuous in front of these other words. And then one of the other things that was put on the blog was about a continuous release cycle. I did use the phrase earlier on, but I think that's the same as our ideation to realization DevOps loop that we talk about. And a final bit of the survey for you. 60% of organisations can't do this. I suspect it's a little bit higher than that, actually. I think people, well, but maybe they can do that, but they can't measure the value later. So you can see 51% saying no there, but linking those two things, I think people don't really do this together. So yeah, the continuousness is a very interesting subject. There are lots of angles and continuous words being flung around out there. I started with continuous funding. I'm seeing that increasingly as a phrase, although when I wrote that blog in March and did a Google search on it, I didn't get any results. I think the dangers of I think it's probably healthy to think continuously and kind of get up every day and do the best you can and make incremental change. I think there is a problem with change fatigue, and you'll remember that the point I started talking about this a few slides ago was really when we'd asked a question about whether organisations had a continuous improvement programme going on in their organisation. I think one of the challenges that we have, and particularly people have when they're trying to undertake DevOps transformations, is they often have all sorts of other things going on, like reorganisations and transformation of this and improvement of that. There's a lot of this stuff goes on, and there can be too much of it. People can feel very apathetic, they can feel that very exhausted by it. So I've run over slightly today, so thank you all for your time. I'm just going to see if I've had any questions from anybody. I can't see any at the moment in the question panel. That was a very whistle-stop tour through a lot of material, but I do hope that you enjoyed it. We will send you all recordings to today's webcast and the slides themselves, so please do get in touch if you have any particular questions or would like to follow up on anything that I've talked about today. Oh, sorry, I've just had a question come through. So the question is, what is meant by right first time? So I'm actually going to see Daniel is here. Daniel, can you hear me okay? Daniel? I've just unmuted you.
Hi.
Hello.
So,
your specialist area. I wondered if you fancied answering this one for me.
So yep, sure. Right first time. But right first time is trying to ask the question, if you were 100% confident from the time you got an idea until it went live, what would be all the questions that you would ask? And so along the way, because as Helen has explaining on the flows, you want to get feedback, and that's the way that you improve. So if you keep challenging yourself, is this right, is this right, is this right? And you actually say, you know, I'm not going to let a defect go through, I'm not going to approve an incident to go live, then you're starting to drive toward this nirvana state of right first time. Helen, what do you think?
Yeah, I've just asked Edwin by chat, actually. Edwin, did you want me to unmute you so you can discuss it some more with Daniel? No, he says that's fine. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't dare to contradict the master of metrics that you are. But, but yeah, it's all about. I'm thinking of one of our particular customers, the banking software customer, where we've got a project that we're working with on them, which is actually called Fix Then Ship, because they had a habit in the past of shipping stuff that perhaps could have been higher quality. So Edwin says, so is it like continuous improvement combined with metrics?
Well, Edwin, I guess the question I have to ask you is, and I come from the IT service management and operations space, so I'm always shifting left in my thinking. And what I discovered is that programmers and PMOs and product owners always got to talk about defects. But when it came to us, it was called an incident. And we had to put severities and service level agreements around it. And so Helen and I coined this great phrase about approving defects to become incidents, and that helps drive down right first time. It's just, you know, it's a very good metric, but it's also a cultural challenge to all the rest of the organization if you look at the end and look back toward the beginning to help you drive better, faster, safer, as Helen was saying.
Is that okay, Edwin? Are you happy with that answer? Yeah, he says that.
Yeah, we're always willing to discuss this further, so please do get in touch.
Absolutely. So I don't have any more questions from anyone at the moment, so I'm going to thank everybody for their time today and wish you all a great rest of your morning, afternoon, or wherever you are in your day. And thank you ever so much, Daniel, for letting me put you on the spot right there.
Thanks. I will get even.
Oh, God. Okay. Thanks, everyone, and goodbye.